What is retrenchment? How to escape from it? We'll check that later. Retrenchment as a term can be applied to a company's progress where it tries to shed off excess inventory. Yes, you heard me right. Even human resources is a kind of inventory. See, the whole aspect is, it's very difficult. Other inventory, which is non-human, is easy to handle. But the sensitivity and the difficulty in handling human resources as an inventory is the most challenging part of management. Now, this aspect of retrenchment, you have seen the news, you know how the announcements came, and I'm sure you were probably, many of us were expecting something to happen. Maybe the magnitude of expectation could have been more or less, but if someone says, I didn't see it coming, I think then you have to wake up. This was something that started, and we were expecting this sort of layoff or firing or retrenchment, whatever you call, since last year, And now with the recession happening geographically, being distributed, which is again very difficult to predict. One dark horse which has emerged out is India. But then even in India, there's a layoff or a retrenchment that has started. We have had news in the last 48 hours, popular delivery Swiggy, they are planning to shed some staff weight off. And then again Wipro, and more can also follow. But what happened last year, if you look in Chennai, the Marimalam Nagar plant was closed. The employees were, waging a sort of a battle with the management. That is also a kind of, that is a liquidation. That is a retrenchment, can be liquidation or a divestment. There are other types. But this is something we should admit that we were expecting it to happen. Now, let's understand how this works, how this retrenchment works. Now, humans are seen as a capital, and the human assets, the total assets, we talk about in layman terminologies like how many PhDs an organization has, how many MBAs, how many software engineers, and everything has got a value. And this is held by what we would otherwise call as something like a talent inventory. A talent inventory holds, and this is spread across the nation as well as across the globe. And it's the whole aspect is not complicated, but it's complex because we deal with human relations and their performance and the performance contribution to the productivity. Now, what is a company's total investment, towards human capital? Now, investment in terms of compensation and benefits, and there's an investment in terms of, the other fringe benefits. There's investment in terms of training, development, sabbaticals, vacations, etc., etc. But there's one more investment which would come under the Pareto's principle, like the time that a manager or a leader spends for his team or her team, that time also has a cost value. Now, that is why I said, computing this becomes very difficult, and many of the people in the HR circles whom I know, we feel that, using a weighted average method may not be accurate. So they go in for rating scales, What the most popular one, which is conceptually called as the bar or the behaviorally anchored rating scale. Now, in a bar, you have normally the numeric value that they fix is something like 5, and each type of behavior gets a numeric value, a decimal value. Now, the parameters that can be chosen can be like, for an engineer, a response to the client, interest or initiative towards problem solving, always calls back, cross checks with the client. Now, this is again marked along with what the client gives a response. So, in the appraisal, sometimes you have something close to 360 degree or at least 180-degree appraisal goes on. So now this is where the complexity comes in, because what you see over here, I have just tried to give a hit rate box and trying to merge, and I'm giving this employee productivity gross rating, a gross rating which comes as a cumulative value. And here, when we want to take a decision and come to a hit rate box, you just have to see two things: either something is high or low. And on the other hand, the other scale, or the axis as you may want to call it, the human capital investment or spend that is being done by the company, this can either be a low or a high. Now, what happens when there's a trade-off? How do companies see? Let me get this straight. It's not the decision to take a retrenchment is not something just of Sundar Pichai. It's not just Mr. Satya who takes the decision. The investors are there. There is a board. You have a planning board. You have an executive board. So this sort of a decision happens at a very high level. Then some of us may have the question, if at all you are going to send people off in such mass numbers, or you're going to fire off 5%, why did they first recruit in the place? Now, I want to tell you this. See, like I said, no company is going to give you a solid bulletproof career. Now, that is the corporate or the private sector. Of course, in India, you do have the government sector. They don't do the retrenchment because the equation is totally different. The boards are different, but that's another story. I will not go into that. Here, when you notice at what quadrant a board has to take a decision. Mr. Satya, he beautifully put it out. He said, the recession is happening and it's geographically distributed, and that is why we have to take this tough decision. Now, firing the bottom 5% doesn't mean that you are firing someone at the bottom of the pyramid. It's not the it's not the freshers or the 1 year or 2 years people who get fired off or who get retrenched. It is a well-known fact, that some, now for example, the retrenchment that Google has announced, you do have people who are, there with the company from the beginning, almost, I should say. Now, such people also look at retrenchment as something like a POBBO, they are pushed off, but they are better off. The compensation package is something really good. Now, had they resigned a year back, they would not be getting this compensation. So, I must say this retrenchment has come in as a blessing in disguise to some, and for some as a shock, and for some as a learning point. Now, the equation works out something like this. You have the gross employee productivity rating as a high or low, and the amount of money that is being spent, in maintaining the human capital. Now, when something has a higher value, you usually sell it off, but that's the stock. But in human resources, it is totally different. Now, here, when you want to shed off the human capital, there is a certain compensation that is given. That means you have to buy the employees out of the organization. It's not you're selling off the employee. You have to buy them so that they can go out, so that you can cut your costs, so that you can make more efficient and sharper decisions, particularly in this era where there is a technology war which is being propelled, or I would say an upsurge of artificial intelligence with deep learning and machine learning that's happening. So here are the 4 quadrants that can come at a generic level. Let's start with something like the employee productivity gross quotient of all. Now, how this is calculated for an individual or for a group or a team or for even a section can be based on certain parameters using individual bars. I'll try to put one in the description where you can just have an idea. But here, this is not pertaining to a team or an individual. This looks at the total gross employee value, in terms of productivity and performance. When we come to a decision like a hit rate box, you have to either say it's high or low, yes or no. That's about it. So here, when the gross productivity is going to be low and you are going to have the spend on the human capital is also low. That means in comparison to industry standards, this particular quadrant is something like the company has not yet spent what the industry is spending. So mostly this could be startups or those companies which are on the upscale, on growing. Now these companies, when other big giants are firing people, these companies could be looking at recruiting people. These companies could be looking at training them. So that is why the low quadrant gets a chance is given for reviewing yourself to move up, to upscale, to change, to train, to innovate. Now when you go up over here to this side, where the employee productivity, the gross productivity is high, but the spend happens to be still low. So here is where you retain the human resources. You retain them as your assets. Now move to the other quadrant. The spend on human capital is high in terms of all compensations, and their productivity also happens to be high. Now this is a complex area where you don't know what to do, because if you reduce the spend on them, it could lead to a decrease in the employee morale. So, but their productivity is also high. It is something like a difficult decision where an employee is performing, but he is not so good for the team. Something like that. Now, what would the company or what would the chief look at doing over here? You can only review this. When you are in this quadrant, you review and you try to move your human resources to other locations, or you try to make some adjustments in terms of a job enlargement or additional responsibilities, wherein you may try to bring in the investment spend a little bit less, be it whether you are in India or in US or across the globe, wherever it is. Now, this is for consideration, and this is a complex thing, but this was what was happening ever since the problem started 2 years ago. Many companies, many large companies were in this quadrant, and that is why I said you should see this coming. You should have seen this coming. Now, come to this one, where the spend is high, but the productivity, the gross productivity has reduced. Practically, this is what was expected, what was happening 2 years back. I don't have to tell you. You had a global meltdown, literally. The only thing that was functioning were the hospitals and the emergency services. Practically, the commerce and the trade came to a standstill. Now, what would happen is, it doesn't mean to say that the productivity has gone down, but since the trade-off with the revenues trickling in and the future investment which has to be high for taking care of the competition, the companies have no choice. You may have to fire off, the 5% or 6%. You have no choice, because if you look at what is going to happen in the future, you're going to have these 3 or 5 circles of big giants, Amazon, Microsoft, and then Google, and they would be vying for the digital customer. So all look at how to bring in that revolutionary AI, which is going to transform many things. It doesn't mean to say that these companies are not going to hire once again. They are going to come back to hire. But now for the future, for a better future for the company as such, and for the market, and for all, I'm sure they are coming out with attractive compensation packages. So the ones who have to worry, to look at how to escape this retrenchment, how to bulletproof your career, that I will have in the next video, very short, I will give some of the steps what people can do to bulletproof their career. But over here, this is where the fire or layoff or the retrenchment starts. So they have no other choice but to go in for that. So it is back to square one, back to the board. It is not an individual decision. So, some of the little hearsay that we see in media that is happening, people are saying, if Sundar Pichai is, I think that sentence, this is my personal opinion, I think it was unwarranted for him to come out and say, I take full responsibility. There's no need for that, because this is something inevitable. Just like how you take out stock, you don't want to carry excess inventory. You want to shut down a plant. This is what I would say it is like economics. It's like mother's kitchen management. When there's more stock in the kitchen, what do? You are not going to buy. If there are going to be no more guests who are coming in, then why would you cook more? You know, economics is kitchen management. That's how economics gets its terminology. And that is what practically anybody will be doing it. So there is no need for any, hate towards any particular individual, because it's not an individual decision. Right? So it is a collective decision, and we are responsible. Yes, the companies are responsible, because they will be looking at, when the employees are being retrenched, they try to look at the fringe benefits, they try to look at the insurance, the medical allowance. Many things are there, and if possible, even help the person to resettle down in their career. So friends, nothing to lose heart, and I think I have taken a few minutes of your time to just show these 4 quadrants and tell that it is a collective decision, it is a market decision, and the next video I will see, this will be at an individual level, where I will tell how you can bulletproof your career and try to escape from retrenchment. Okay? Till then, bye. Friends, if you like this video, I would want you to subscribe so that I can come out with more videos. Do share this video, like and subscribe. Till then, make it a great day. All the best.